The possibilities of an intercultural architecture. For thousands of years, the Indigenous Australian people lived in harmony with the Australian landscape, in structures such as these. Since European settlement, their organic, natural, and temporary architecture was replaced by the solid and structural style of the Europeans. Recently, there has been a call to reinstate Indigenous design principles into the Western idea of a permanent structure, in other terms, an intercultural building. This presented a challenge and posed questions such as, is it possible for Indigenous Australian and Western cultures to be represented in a single building? And, is it possible to integrate the organic, natural, and temporary architecture of the Indigenous people with the structured, unforgiving, and permanent architecture of the Europeans? These are some of the many questions that were considered in the conceptual and planning stages of the Brambuck Living Cultural Centre, located in the Grampian mountain range of Victoria. Designed by Western architect Gregory Burgess for a consortium of 5 Koori communities, the building has always had its challenges, in both collaboration and design. However, the true question is, has Brambuck Living Cultural Centre been successful in reflecting the Indigenous way of life and principles in the shell of a Western building, thus achieving its intercultural status? From an academic perspective, there are always conflicting opinions. However, Brambuck is classed as successful by multiple sources, with The Age describing the building as fostering harmony between 2 living cultures, while the architectural media admires it for its capacity to promote an organic, non-industrial approach to Indigenous architecture. So how has the building integrated the 2 vastly different cultures? One way in which this has been achieved is through the integration of Western elements of built form with the ideas and principles of the Indigenous people. It displays Indigenous elements such as a roof shape that reflects that of the mountain range, making the building seem as if it is part of the landscape. A shape that represents the sweeping wings of the cockatoo, making reference to the importance of wildlife to the Aboriginal people. A circular design to reflect the organic forms of nature. And a winding ramp which is used for circulation throughout the building and represents an eel that has a spiritual connection with the Koori communities. These design elements, along with many others, reflect the Indigenous connection to the land and to the natural environment. Another way in which the building achieves its intercultural status is through the incorporation of these Indigenous elements of design into the Western principles of a solid, stagnant building, using Western, Indigenous, and integrated construction techniques. For instance, a Western technique of steam bending was used to achieve the circular form of the roof, while in contrast, the use of consolidated earth, a construction method sympathetic to Indigenous architecture, was employed to form some walls and floors. Brambuck is also sympathetic to the Indigenous way of life, with the use of an untreated tree trunk as a structural beam being a perfect example of the integration of Western principles of construction with the Indigenous belief system and their connection to the land. So has Brambuck Living Cultural Centre been successful in reflecting the Indigenous way of life and principles in the shell of a Western building, thus achieving its intercultural status? We believe that through the integration of Indigenous design principles, the use of integrated construction techniques, and the innovative use of natural materials, that Brambuck has been successful in reflecting the Indigenous way of life and principles into the shell of a Western building, thus earning its status as a successful intercultural building.